Spent my life savings to help my parents buy a new house, but they stole it from me for my stepbrother. I gave up my entire life savings, every single penny, to help my family buy their dream home. And you know what they did? They stole it from me. My own mother and stepbrother went behind my back, forged my signature, and took everything I worked for. But here's the thing, they thought I was weak. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They had no idea who they were messing with. By the time I was done, they regretted every single lie. Stay with me, because this story will leave you absolutely speechless. I never thought I'd be betrayed by the very people I sacrificed everything for. Family is supposed to be your safe place, the people who stand by you no matter what. But I learned the hard way that not everyone shares the same definition of loyalty. My name is Emma Carter, and if you had told me a year ago that I would be standing on the front porch of a house I paid for with every penny I had, only to realize it wasn't mine anymore, I would have called you crazy. But that's exactly what happened. It started with a phone call. My mother's voice was shaking, thick with desperation, as she told me they were in trouble, that they were on the brink of losing their home. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the quiet shame of someone who had run out of options. I didn't hesitate. I had spent the last decade grinding through grueling shifts in the ER, working myself to the bone to build a future not just for myself, but for my family. Every extra hour, every sleepless night, every sacrificed weekend was all part of a bigger plan. I had been saving for my own house, my dream home, a quiet little craftsman with a big kitchen and a garden where I could finally feel settled. But in that moment, none of it mattered. My family needed me, and that was all I cared about. I wired them everything I had, $225,000. My entire life savings. It was enough to put a substantial down payment on a new house, enough to give them a fresh start. We had an agreement. The house would be in my name, not just because it was my money, but because I needed security, something to show for the years of sacrifice. My mother assured me no. She promised that the paperwork would reflect that. The day of the housewarming should have been a celebration. It was a beautiful two-story colonial, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a wraparound porch that made it look like something out of a magazine. I had spent weeks helping them pick out furniture, choosing paint colors, making sure it felt like home. I should have felt excited as I stepped through the front door. Instead, I felt uneasy. The energy in the room shifted the moment I walked in. Conversations hushed. Eyes darted away from me. My mother avoided my gaze. My stepfather, Carl, barely acknowledged me. And then there was Alex, my 39-year-old stepbrother, standing in the middle of the living room like he owned the place, grinning like the cat that swallowed the canary. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the nagging feeling in my gut. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice light but firm. My mother waved a dismissive hand, her tone a little too cheerful. "Oh, don't be dramatic, sweetheart. We're just celebrating." Dramatic. That word sent a cold chill down my spine. The last time she had called me dramatic was when I had warned her not to lend Alex money for his crypto startup. That money had vanished overnight. I turned to Alex, my stomach tightening as I noticed the way he stood just a little too comfortably, drink in hand, gesturing as he spoke to a group of our relatives. I caught snippets of his conversation, something about his plans for the house. My throat went dry. "What do you mean, your plans?" Silence. My mother sighed, finally meeting my gaze. "Emma, don't make a scene." "Make a scene?" My heart pounded in my chest. "I paid for this house." "What is going on?" Carl cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Emma, things changed." Changed. My mother pulled a stack of papers from the kitchen counter, flipping through them as if she were presenting me with a perfectly reasonable explanation. Then she handed me a page, the deed. And there it was, in bold, black letters. The name on the ownership line wasn't mine. It was Alexander Thomas Carter. The first stared at it, my hands trembling. The room spun. My breath hitched. No, I whispered. No, this isn't possible. We had an agreement. Alex smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. Yeah, well, plans change. My mother crossed her arms, her face an unreadable mask. Emma, you're a doctor. You'll make that money back in no time. Alex has a family to think about, a baby on the way. He needs stability. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my trust, my security, my years of sacrifice. And the worst part? They didn't even look guilty. Alex set his glass down on the marble countertop, the one I had picked out. I'm thinking of remodeling the kitchen, he mused. Opening it up a little. Making it ours. Ours. Something inside me snapped. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, a cold, calculated calm settled over me. I turned on my heel, pushing through the crowd, my pulse thundering in my ears. Rachel, my best friend, caught my arm near the door. Emma, she whispered, I don't think they did this legally. You need to talk to Marcus. Marcus, Rachel's older brother, a real estate attorney. Hope flickered in my chest, but I smothered it. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what they had done. My mother's voice rang out behind me. Emma, stop sulking. Come back inside and be happy for your brother. I paused, my hands curling into fists. Then, slowly, I turned back, meeting her gaze with a smile so small, so sharp, it could have cut glass. Actually, I said, my voice smooth as silk, I just wanted to say thank you. She blinked. For what? I slung my purse over my shoulder, my grip tightening around the strap. For helping me see things clearly. And with that, I walked out the door. They had no idea what was coming. I drove away from that house with my knuckles white against the steering wheel, my pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The betrayal wasn't just a slap in the face, it was a knife to the gut, twisted and left there to bleed. My entire life savings, my future, my security gone, handed over to a man who had done nothing to earn it, a man who had coasted through life making mistake after mistake, only to have our mother bail him out every time. And now she had sacrificed me to do it. I could still hear her voice, calm, almost condescending. You're a doctor, sweetheart. You'll make that money back in no time. As if my years of sacrifice, the long nights in the ER, the sleepless shifts, the birthdays and holidays I missed, the relationships I let slip away, all of it meant nothing. As if the house I had envisioned for myself, the one thing I had worked toward for over a decade, was just a spare asset to be handed off to Alex because he needed stability. And what about me? What about everything I had given up for this? I gritted my teeth as I turned onto the highway, my mind racing. Rachel was right. I needed legal advice. I needed to know if what they did was even possible, if there was any way to undo it. Because one thing was certain, I wasn't going to roll over and let them steal from me. They thought they could pull this off because I was the nice daughter, the responsible one, the one who never fought back. They thought I'd be hurt, that I'd cry, but ultimately I'd accept it. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus answered on the second ring. Emma, everything okay? I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel. No, I need your help. He didn't ask any more questions, just told me to come by his office first thing in the morning. That night, I barely slept. I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, scanning through property laws, real estate fraud cases, anything that might give me an edge. My mother's important documents folder sat next to me, the one I had swiped from the kitchen before I left. I flipped through contracts, receipts, anything I could find that might prove they had promised to put the house in my name. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. By 8:30 the next morning, I was in Marcus's office, my fingers clenched around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He sat across from me, his dark eyes scanning the documents I had brought. Every few seconds, he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. This is bad, he finally said, exhaling sharply. I stiffened. Bad for them or bad for me? He met my gaze. For them, if we move fast. Emma, this isn't just a moral betrayal. This is legally questionable at best. Outright fraud at worst. If you wired them the money under the agreement that the house would be in your name, and they transferred the title without your consent, that's a serious problem. Especially if they forged your signature on anything. My stomach twisted. And if they did? Marcus tapped a pen against his desk, thinking, then we have a case. But we need proof. Right now, all we have is your word against theirs. And given that this is family, they'll spin the story however they need to make you look like the unreasonable one. I gritted my teeth. Of course they would. My mother had spent years playing the martyr, painting herself as the long-suffering parent who had to make hard decisions for the good of the family. And Alex? He was a born manipulator. He had been getting away with things since we were kids. If they thought they could gaslight their way out of this, they would. Marcus leaned forward. Did you sign anything that transferred the title? No, I said quickly. At least I don't think I did. But I trusted them. If they put something in front of me and told me it was just a standard agreement, my breath hitched. Marcus, what if they forged my signature? He nodded grimly. Then we take this to the next level. But we need to be smart. If they did forge your signature, there will be a paper trail. I'll start looking into the title transfer today. In the meantime, you need to act normal. Normal? I nearly laughed. How the hell am I supposed to act normal when they stole my house? Marcus held up a hand. I get it, Emma. I do. But if they catch even a whiff of what we're planning, they'll start covering their tracks. They'll destroy documents, alter paperwork, maybe even sell the house out from under you before we can do anything. My stomach dropped. The thought of Alex walking away with my money was bad enough. But the idea of him selling my house, turning a profit on something I built with my own blood, sweat and tears, it made my vision go red. Marcus was watching me carefully. Emma. I forced a breath. I won't let them know, but I need to do something. Then start with information. See what you can find out without raising alarms. Play their game. The idea of pretending to be okay with what they had done made my skin crawl. But Marcus was right. If I wanted to win, I had to be strategic. That evening, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Emma? I forced my tone to be light. Hey, Mom. I just wanted to talk. There was a pause, then a breath of relief. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. I know you were upset yesterday, but I hope you've had time to think things through. This was really for the best. For the best. I gripped my phone tighter, pushing down the fury rising in my chest. Yeah, I said slowly. I want to understand. She took the bait. Oh, honey, I know it was a shock. But Alex really needs this. And you? You'll be fine. You're strong, independent. This house will give him stability, and stability is so important when you have a family to provide for. And what am I, Mom? Just your backup plan? I swallowed the words. Instead, I said, I guess I just want to make sure everything was done the right way. Legally? I mean, a brief pause. Of course, sweetheart. Everything was handled properly. I nearly smiled. She was lying. Would you mind sending me a copy of the paperwork? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Just so I can have it for my records? Another pause. Oh, well, I don't have all of it on hand, but I can get it to you later. I had her. Oh, no rush, I said easily. I trust you. The words tasted like poison, but I forced them out anyway. Because trust? That was the last thing I had for her. And soon, she was going to regret ever betraying mine. I stood there, staring at the deed in my stepbrother's name, my heart pounding in my ears. They had stolen from me, betrayed me in the worst way possible. But instead of breaking down, I did something they never expected. I decided to fight back. And trust me, I had a plan. But here's the question, do you think they saw it coming? Comment 1 if you think I took them by surprise. Or 2 if you think they found a way to fight back. Let's see how many of you can predict what happens next. I sat in my car outside my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mother's voice still echoed in my head. "Oh, honey, I don't have all of it on hand, but I can get it to you later." A lie. A flimsy, obvious lie. She wasn't planning to give me anything. She was stalling, buying time, and I knew exactly why. They were scrambling, covering their tracks, but they didn't know I was already ahead of them. Marcus had been right. I needed to play their game, and part of that meant pretending I wasn't a threat. Yet, I forced a deep breath, unclenching my fingers from the wheel. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I couldn't let the anger control me. Not yet. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. And to get that, I needed evidence. Pasting on the most neutral expression I could manage, I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. My mother answered the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me. She smiled tight, rehearsed. "Emma, sweetheart, I was hoping you'd come by." Liar. I forced a small smile. I needed to see you. That much was true. I needed to look her in the eye and confirm what I already suspected. She felt no guilt, no remorse. She stepped aside, ushering me in. The house smelled the same as always, a mix of lavender and coffee, the scent of childhood. But it no longer felt like home. It hadn't in years. As I stepped into the living room, I noticed the coffee table was covered in papers. My mother's eyes flickered to them for a fraction of a second before she quickly moved to stack them. But it was too late. I had already seen them. Legal documents, contracts. They were panicking. She let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, don't mind this mess. Just some paperwork we're sorting through." Sorting through? Or trying to hide? I stayed quiet, letting her talk. The longer she rambled, the more I saw the cracks in her carefully curated act. She was fidgety, avoiding eye contact. Her smile faltered at the edges, and then I heard it. A voice from the other room. "She's here? Now? Alex?" My jaw tightened. My mother's expression flickered with something unreadable. Fear? Guilt? It didn't matter. "Emma," she started, but I was already moving toward the doorway. Alex stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, his entire body stiff. When he saw me, his lips curled into a smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. Look who finally decided to be reasonable. I folded my arms, keeping my tone even. "Reasonable?" He leaned against the counter, tilting his head. "Yeah. I mean, what's done is done, right? No need to drag this into some ugly legal battle." I stared at him, feeling my anger coil tighter. He thought I was here to talk, to accept this. They still thought I was weak. I took a slow step forward, my voice low and calm. "Where's the deed, Alex?" He blinked, his smirk slipping just slightly. "What?" I didn't move, didn't blink. "The deed? The one you transferred into your name? The one you had no right to take? Where is it?" He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Jesus, Emma. Mom said she'd get you the paperwork. Just be patient." Patience. I had spent my entire life being patient. I had waited, endured, sacrificed, and for what? To be treated like a disposable ATM? I took another step closer, forcing him to meet my gaze. "You forged my signature, didn't you?" Silence. His jaw clenched. And in that moment, I knew. He had. I exhaled slowly, nodding. "You did. And you thought you could get away with it." My mother stepped in, placing a hand on my arm. "Emma, honey, let's not." I yanked away from her touch. "Don't." My voice was steel. "Don't stand there and act like this is okay." Her face twisted, frustration bleeding into her expression. "It's not that simple. We needed this." "We?" "No, they needed this." I shook my head, my vision sharpening with a clarity I hadn't felt before. "You stole from me." My mother's mouth opened, then closed. She had no defense. There was none. Alex, however, was less subtle. He scoffed, tossing his phone onto the counter. "Oh, get over yourself. You act like you're some damn victim. You're a doctor, Emma. You'll be fine. I have a family to take care of." I laughed. Actually laughed. The sheer audacity of it was almost amusing. A family? You mean the same family that's been bailing you out of every mistake you've ever made? The same family that just committed fraud to cover for you? His face darkened. You better watch yourself. That was the moment I realized something. Alex wasn't nervous. He was angry. I tilted my head. Why? What are you afraid of? That I'll take back what's mine? He pushed off the counter, stepping toward me. You don't have a case. Oh? I arched a brow. Then why are you panicking? His nostrils flared. I'm not. Another lie. I smiled. You're right, though. I don't just have a case. I have proof. And soon, I'll have everything I need to undo every single lie you've told. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Good. I turned on my heel, heading for the door. Emma, my mother called after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't need her excuses. I didn't need her justifications. I needed justice, and I was going to get it. I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. My heartbeat was a dull roar in my ears, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on me like an iron vice. Alex was bluffing. I knew he was. But the way he spoke, the confidence in his voice, it rattled me. He thought he had covered his tracks. He thought I had no way to fight back. He thought I was the same quiet, obedient daughter who had always put family first, no matter how much it cost me. He was wrong. As soon as I stepped into my apartment, I locked the door behind me and exhaled, willing my pulse to steady. My mind was already spinning through every possible move I had left. I needed evidence. Hard proof. I had the original documents, the agreement stating that the house was to be in my name. But I needed more. I needed the fraudulent deed, the altered paperwork, the emails, the text messages, anything that proved they had knowingly and deliberately stolen from me. I grabbed my phone and dialed Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. Emma? They forged my signature. My voice was sharp, unwavering. I confronted them, and they didn't even deny it. There was a brief pause, then a quiet curse. I had a feeling. Did they say anything else? They're cocky. They think I can't touch them. Alex all but laughed in my face. Marcus exhaled sharply. That's good, I frowned. How is that good? Because overconfidence makes people sloppy. And if they were stupid enough to forge your signature, they probably left a trail. I paced the length of my living room, my pulse still too fast. So what do? We go after the paperwork first. The fraud hinges on documentation. If we can prove the signature was forged, this whole thing falls apart. I bit my lip. I need access to that deed. I can request an official copy through legal channels, but that'll take time, he admitted. And if they know we're onto them, they might try to stall or alter more documents. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Time wasn't on my side. I could feel it, sense it in the way Alex had spoken. He was already working on something else, some other way to shut me out completely before I could fight back. Then, a thought struck me. They have a file, I murmured. I saw it today, papers all over the coffee table. My mom tried to hide them the second I walked in. Marcus didn't miss a beat. If those papers contain anything useful, we need them. I swallowed hard, already knowing what I had to do. I can get them. His tone turned cautious. Emma, I know what you're going to say, I cut in, but I can do this. There was a beat of silence. Then, be careful. That night, I parked a block away from my parents' house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The neighborhood was quiet, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel, my stomach twisted into knots. This was insane. I was a doctor, not a detective, not some vigilante sneaking into houses to uncover evidence. And yet, here I was, my entire future teetering on the edge of what I might find inside that house. I took a breath, steadying myself. I wasn't breaking in. I still had a key. My mother had never asked for it back. Probably because she never expected me to stop being their obedient daughter. That, at least, was still working in my favor. I stepped out of the car, moving quickly but carefully up the driveway. The house was dark. My parents were creatures of habit, they always went to bed early. But I couldn't afford to be reckless. I slid the key into the lock, wincing at the faint click as the door opened. My pulse roared in my ears as I slipped inside, shutting it quietly behind me. The living room was exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. The papers on the coffee table were gone. My stomach sank. I moved quickly, scanning the room. The stack had been thick, too much to just disappear completely. My mother wasn't that thorough. She would have stashed them somewhere nearby. The kitchen. I crept forward, my ears straining for any sound of movement. The house was silent. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, the same scent that had filled my childhood, but it no longer felt like home. Reaching the kitchen, I moved to the counter where my mother kept her important papers. A woven basket sat in the corner, stuffed with envelopes, bills, and other documents. I rifled through them quickly, my fingers shaking slightly. Nothing. Then my eyes landed on the drawer beneath the counter. I pulled it open, and there it was, a thick stack of papers haphazardly shoved inside. I barely breathed as I pulled them out, my hands trembling. I flipped through the pages quickly, scanning each one, and then I saw it. My name, my forged signature. A chill ran down my spine. This was it. Proof. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of everything, my fingers flying. Then a sound. The floor creaked behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Emma? I spun around. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable in the dim light. My heart slammed against my ribs. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then her gaze flickered to the papers in my hands, and I saw it. The flicker of realization, of guilt, and worst of all, of fear. She knew. She knew what I had found. And for the first time in my life, I saw my mother, not as my mother, but as a woman who had betrayed me, who had stolen from me, and she knew I wasn't going to let it go. I squared my shoulders, gripping the papers tightly. She took a step forward, her voice soft, almost pleading. Emma, honey, we need to talk. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice steady. We don't. And then, before she could stop me, I walked out the door. I drove straight to Marcus's office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. My mother's voice was still ringing in my ears, soft and pleading, as if I was the one who had done something wrong, as if I should feel guilty for catching her in the act. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt furious, betrayed, and, more than anything, determined. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, my mind was clear. This was no longer just about the house. This was about justice, about making sure they never did this to me or anyone again. I grabbed the folder of stolen documents from the passenger seat and stepped out into the cold night air, my breath coming in sharp bursts. Inside, Marcus was waiting, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The second he saw me, his eyes flicked to the folder in my hands. You got something? He asked, straightening. I didn't say a word. I just dropped the papers onto his desk. He opened the folder, scanning the documents, his fingers flipping through them quickly. Then he froze. Is this? My forged signature, I confirmed, my voice tight. They didn't even try to make it look real. It's sloppy, arrogant. Marcus let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Damn, they really thought they could get away with this. They still think they can, I muttered. They don't know I have these yet. He tapped a finger against the page, his mind already working. This changes everything. With this, we don't just have a civil case, we have a criminal one. Fraud, forgery, maybe even conspiracy, depending on how deep this goes. He looked up at me. Are you ready for that? I met his gaze without hesitation. I don't have a choice. He nodded. All right. First thing tomorrow, I'll file for an injunction to freeze the deed. That'll stop them from selling or transferring the house while we sort this out. Good, I said, but my stomach was still twisted into knots. Alex is up to something. I could hear it in his voice earlier. He's desperate, and desperate people make stupid choices. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temple. That's what worries me. If they realize you're onto them, they could try to cover their tracks, destroy evidence, or worse, make you look like the villain. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knew my family. I knew exactly what they were capable of. If they felt backed into a corner, they wouldn't just surrender. They'd fight dirty. They already tried to gaslight me, I said. Tried to make me feel guilty. Like I was the one hurting them. Marcus scoffed. Classic manipulation. They want you to doubt yourself. Second-guess your own instincts. Well, it's not working, I said, crossing my arms. Not this time. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right, then here's what we do next. The next morning, I barely had time to finish my first cup of coffee before my phone started buzzing. My mother. I let it ring. Then another call. Carl. Then Alex. I ignored them all, my heart pounding. They knew. Maybe they had checked the drawer. Maybe my mother had recognized the look in my eyes when I walked out last night. I didn't have to wonder for long. At exactly 10:00 a.m., my apartment intercom buzzed. I walked over, my stomach a tight knot, and pressed the button. Emma. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, sweet and desperate. Honey, we need to talk. I hesitated for half a second. Then, calmly, I pressed the button and disconnected the call. A minute later, my phone rang again. Text message. I know you're home. Please, don't do this. We're family. Another text, this time from Carl. This is a mistake. Just come talk to us. Then Alex, you think you're smart, but you're not. You're going to regret this. That one sent ice through my veins. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it straight to Marcus. His response came within seconds. Save everything. We might need it. I took a slow breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. They were panicking. Good. I spent the rest of the morning scanning and organizing every document, making copies of everything. Then, at exactly noon, Marcus called. Injunctions filed, he said. Judge will review it by the end of the day. If it's approved, they won't be able to sell, transfer, or modify anything related to the house. I closed my eyes in relief. Thank you. But there's something else, he added. I sat up straighter. What? I checked court records this morning. Alex already tried to list the house for sale yesterday. My grip on the phone tightened. Are you serious? Dead serious. But the listing's been pulled now, probably because they realized they didn't have all their paperwork in order. They're trying to move fast, Emma. And that means they're scared. I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. So what do we do? Marcus was silent for a moment. Then, we make them regret underestimating you. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone. No more calls, no more texts. It was eerie, the silence. It didn't feel like they had given up, it felt like they were planning something. At exactly 7:30 p.m., I got my answer. A new text from an unknown number. Walk away while you still can. My blood ran cold. I forwarded it to Marcus. His response was immediate. I'm calling in a favor. Be careful. I stared at the message for a long moment, then locked my phone and stood up. This wasn't over. Not even close. I sat in my car outside Marcus's office, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The weight of the past few days pressed down on me, exhaustion seeping into my bones. But I couldn't stop now, not when I was this close. The text from the unknown number, walk away, while you still can, echoed in my mind. A taunt, a warning, or maybe both. But they didn't know me as well as they thought they did. I wasn't the type to walk away. I grabbed the folder of evidence from the passenger seat, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the crisp night air. The office building loomed in front of me, its glass windows reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. I pushed through the front door, my footsteps echoing against the tiled floor as I made my way to Marcus's office. He was waiting, leaning against his desk, his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but the moment he saw me, his eyes flicked to the folder in my hands. "Tell me you got something," he said. I dropped the folder onto his desk. "I got more than something. I got proof." He opened the folder, flipping through the documents quickly. Then he froze. His jaw tightened, his grip on the pages firm. "They forged your signature," he muttered. "Sloppy work, too. They didn't even try to make it look real." I nodded, my pulse pounding in my ears. "And they sent me a threat. An unknown number. Said I should walk away." Marcus exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. "They're getting desperate." He looked at me, his voice serious. "And desperate people make mistakes." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of his desk. "We need to move fast, Marcus. Alex tried to sell the house yesterday. They're trying to cover their tracks before we can stop them." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I already filed the injunction. If the judge approves it, they won't be able to touch the house." He flipped another page, his eyes scanning the forged contract. "But this is what will bury them. If we can prove they knowingly committed fraud, we can take this to court, and they won't just lose the house, they could face criminal charges." A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. "Good." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "Emma, I need to ask you something. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we take this to court, there's no going back. Your mother, your stepbrother, Carl. They won't just lose the house. They could lose everything." I didn't hesitate. "They didn't hesitate when they stole from me." Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "All right, then let's take them down." That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face. The way she had dismissed me, called me dramatic, acted as if my life savings meant nothing. I saw Alex's smug grin, the way he lounged in my house, talking about tearing out the kitchen. I had chosen. I saw Carl's indifference, the way he had crossed his arms and told me it only made sense that Alex got the house. They thought I would accept it, that I would move on, let them take what was mine, and disappear into the background like I always had. But they were wrong. I was done being the good daughter. The next morning, I was at the courthouse by 8 a.m. Marcus met me on the steps, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones. When he saw me, he nodded and ended the call. "Injunctions approved," he said. "The house is officially frozen. If they try to sell it, they'll be in contempt of court." Relief flooded through me. That's one battle won. "But they're not done fighting," Marcus warned. "Their lawyer reached out this morning. They're claiming you gifted Alex the money." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Gifted? They forged my signature." Marcus smirked. "Yeah, and that's why they're going to lose." We entered the courthouse, the air thick with the scent of old paper and coffee. The hearing was set for next week, but today we were filing an official lawsuit against them. Fraud, breach of contract, grand theft. I handed over the documents, watching as the clerk stamped them, marking the beginning of the end for my so-called family. By the time I left the courthouse, my phone was buzzing. My mother. I ignored it. Carl, ignored. Then Alex. I stared at the screen, then finally answered. "Emma." His voice was low, sharp. "You need to stop this." I leaned against my car, my grip tightening around my phone. "Or what? You think you're so smart, but you're not," he hissed. "You're making a mistake." "A big one," I smiled coldly. "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing to you." Silence. Then he laughed. "You really think you're gonna win this?" I opened my car door, sliding inside. "I don't think, Alex. I know." I hung up before he could say another word. That evening, I was sitting on my couch, reviewing case notes with Marcus on a video call when a loud bang echoed through my apartment. I froze. Marcus's face darkened. What was that? I stood slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. I don't know. I walked toward the front door, every instinct in my body screaming danger. I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Then another bang. My heart pounded. I reached for my phone, my fingers tightening around it. A voice. Muffled, slurred. Alex. I swallowed hard, gripping the doorknob. He's here, I whispered. Marcus cursed. Call the police. Now. I hesitated. Then I heard it. Alex's voice, slurred with alcohol, sneering through the door. You're gonna lose everything, Emma. A shiver ran down my spine. Then I did exactly what Marcus told me. I called the police. And as I stood there, phone to my ear, waiting for the dispatcher to pick up, I realized something. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war. I sat in my car outside the courthouse, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my hands started to cramp. My pulse was hammering in my ears. My stomach twisted into knots. This was it. This was the day everything came to light. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering evidence, working with Marcus to make sure every single lie, every single manipulation my family had pulled, would be exposed in court. And yet, despite knowing I had the truth on my side, there was still that tiny flicker of doubt because I knew them. I knew the way my mother could twist words, the way Carl could play the victim, the way Alex could lie with such ease it almost sounded convincing. They weren't just going to sit there and take it. They were going to fight. They were going to try and make me look like the villain. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another call from my mother. I stared at the screen, the familiar number lighting up, and let it ring. I already knew what she wanted. She'd been calling all morning, probably cycling through every tactic in her playbook, pleading, guilt-tripping, trying to make me second-guess myself. But I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. I inhaled sharply and pushed open the car door, stepping into the crisp morning air. The courthouse loomed in front of me, a solid, unmovable structure of stone and glass, standing as a reminder that today wasn't about emotions. It was about facts. It was about justice. Marcus was waiting for me at the steps, a thick folder in one hand, a coffee in the other. He looked up as I approached, giving me a once-over like he was checking for signs of hesitation. You okay? I nodded. Let's get this over with. He handed me the coffee. Drink. You need to be sharp. I took a sip, the warmth grounding me before following him inside. The air in the courthouse was cold, the hum of conversations and shuffling papers filling the space. When we entered the courtroom, my stomach twisted as I spotted them, my mother, Carl, and Alex, all huddled together at the defendant's table. Their lawyer, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a smug air about him, was whispering to them. The moment my mother saw me, she stood up abruptly, moving toward me like she actually thought I'd let her speak to me now. Emma, please, she whispered, reaching out like she could still pull me back in. We don't have to do this. We're family. Marcus stepped in smoothly between us. She has nothing to say to you. Her expression hardened instantly. You're really going to go through with this? To your own mother? After everything we've done for you? I met her gaze, my voice calm, unwavering. You mean after everything you stole from me? Yeah, I am. Her lips parted slightly, like she was going to protest. But before she could say another word, the bailiff called our case. I turned away from her, walking to my seat, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my chest. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an expression that screamed no nonsense, glanced at the case file before looking up at us. Miss Carter, you're contesting the property transfer on claims of fraud? Marcus stood. Yes, Your Honor. We have overwhelming evidence that my client, Dr. Emma Carter, was deceived by the defendants into financing a home under the false pretense that it would be placed in her name. Instead, they forged documents, transferring ownership to her stepbrother without her consent. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents in front of her. Mr. Bowers, your response? Alex's lawyer stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the kind of ease that only came from years of courtroom theatrics. Your Honor, The real story here is one of miscommunication. My clients believe Dr. Carter had willingly gifted the property to her stepbrother out of a shared sense of familial responsibility. There was never any intent to deceive. Rather, this seems to be an unfortunate misunderstanding. I nearly laughed. Misunderstanding? I had documents proving otherwise. I had texts, emails, bank records. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. Marcus didn't even flinch. If that were true, Your Honor, we wouldn't be here today. Dr. Carter has provided signed agreements showing that the house was explicitly supposed to be in her name. The defendants went behind her back, forged legal documents, and attempted to erase her claim to the property entirely. The judge studied the paperwork, her expression unreadable. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, wringing her hands. Carl sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. But Alex? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, like this was just another minor inconvenience in his life. The judge finally exhaled. I'd like to hear directly from Dr. Carter. Miss Carter, can you explain in your own words what happened? I stood, my legs surprisingly steady as I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to let them rattle me. I wasn't going to let them twist the story. This was my truth. 6 months ago, my mother called me, telling me they were about to lose their home. I had spent years saving money for a house of my own, but when she asked for help, I didn't hesitate. I wired over $225,000, my entire savings for the down payment on a new home under the agreement that it would be in my name, as a way to protect my investment. My mother and stepfather promised me that. I trusted them. I swallowed hard, my voice steady. Then, when the house was purchased, I found out not from them, but from overhearing a conversation at the housewarming party that they had transferred the deed to my stepbrother, Alex. Without my knowledge, without my consent, they stole what I had worked my entire life for. The courtroom was silent. The judge nodded, gesturing for me to sit back down before turning to Alex. Mr. Carter, is this true? Alex shrugged, his smirk never wavering. She's making it sound a lot worse than it was. It was a family decision. I clenched my fists. Family decision? Like I hadn't been part of the family for years. Marcus stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C text messages between Dr. Carter and her mother confirming that the house would remain in her name. The bailiff took the printed messages from Marcus, handing them to the judge. As she read, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she looked at Alex. So you're telling me Dr. Carter was aware of the transfer? Alex hesitated for half a second too long. I mean, she didn't fight us on it. Marcus smirked. Because she didn't know. That's the definition of fraud. The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. All right. I've seen enough for now. We'll take a recess before proceeding further. As the judge stood to leave, my mother turned to me, eyes wide, voice a harsh whisper. Emma, please. Don't do this. I looked at her, my chest tight with years of disappointment, of betrayal, of finally seeing things clearly. This, I whispered back, this is justice. I sat stiffly in my chair, my fingers curled into fists on the table as the judge called for the recess. The air in the courtroom felt thick, suffocating, but I forced myself to stay still, to not let them see the way my pulse was racing. My mother's plea still rang in my ears. Emma, please. Don't do this. Don't do this? As if this was something I had chosen out of spite, instead of something I was forced into by their betrayal. As if I was the one who had taken something that didn't belong to me. I exhaled slowly, shoving down the rage bubbling beneath my skin, and stood up, smoothing out the front of my blazer. Marcus was already at my side, his expression unreadable as he leaned in slightly. They're unraveling, he murmured. Alex is cocky, but your mother's nervous. She wasn't expecting you to have that much evidence. I nodded, my jaw tight. She was expecting me to roll over. He smirked. That's where they screwed up. We walked out of the courtroom together, heading into the hallway outside. I could feel their eyes on me, my mother, Carl, and Alex. who was leaning back in his chair like he had already won, like this was just another one of his manipulative games. But I wasn't playing by his rules anymore. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the tile floor, refusing to acknowledge them. Marcus led me toward the benches near the windows, away from prying ears. "Judge Calloway is tough, but she's fair," he said. "And she doesn't like liars." He gestured toward the courtroom door. Alex was cocky, but when she pressed him, he hesitated. That's a problem for him. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Do you think we have this?" Marcus exhaled, glancing around before lowering his voice. "Honestly, yeah. But they're not going to go down without a fight. They're going to push back hard after recess." He studied me for a moment. "You ready for that?" I thought about everything I had sacrificed, everything I had lost. The years I spent working overtime, the exhaustion, the loneliness, all for them. And the way they had thrown it back in my face, like I was nothing, like I was disposable. I looked him in the eye. "I'm ready." Before Marcus could respond, a familiar voice cut through the hallway. "Emma." I tensed. My mother was standing just a few feet away, her expression drawn tight with frustration and something else, desperation. Carl stood beside her, silent, while Alex hovered slightly behind them, his arms crossed, that same smug grin plastered across his face. Marcus shifted slightly, placing himself between us. This isn't the time or the place. But my mother ignored him, stepping closer. "Emma, can we talk for a second?" I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "Oh, now you want to talk? You didn't seem interested in talking when you were forging my signature." She flinched, but she recovered quickly. "You're making this into something it's not." I barked out a laugh. "I'm making it into fraud, because that's exactly what it is." Carl cleared his throat. "Look, sweetheart, we don't have to make this ugly. This is just a misunderstanding." I turned to Marcus, raising an eyebrow. "Marcus, is fraud a misunderstanding?" He smirked. "Not last time I checked." My mother's face twisted. "Emma," she hissed, her voice low, "this is your family. Do you really want to tear this family apart?" I felt a cold, sharp bitterness spread through my chest. "You tore this family apart the second you decided I wasn't worth being honest with." Alex scoffed. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You're really going to drag us through court over a house?" I turned to him then, feeling something cold settle inside me. "My house," I corrected. "The house I paid for. The house you stole from me." He rolled his eyes. "Jesus, you're acting like we robbed you at gunpoint." I took a slow, deliberate step closer. "You did rob me. You just used a pen instead of a gun." His jaw twitched. I could see the irritation creeping into his expression, the way he hated that I wasn't bending, that I wasn't caving the way I always had before. Marcus clapped his hands together once, breaking the tension. "All right, I think that's enough pre-trial negotiations." He turned to me. "Come on, Emma." I hesitated, just for a second, then turned on my heel, walking away without another word. I could feel their eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around, because for the first time, I wasn't the one looking for their approval. The second half of the hearing was brutal. Alex's lawyer tried everything, painting me as selfish, as greedy, as someone who was trying to punish her family over a financial disagreement. He pulled out every manipulation tactic, twisting words, using my own loyalty against me, but the evidence was on my side. Every time he tried to spin the story, Marcus countered with hard-proof bank transfers, text messages, even legal warnings that my mother and Carl had ignored. The judge's patience started wearing thin, and I could see it in her expression, in the way her lips pressed into a thin line every time Alex opened his mouth. Then came the moment that sealed it. Marcus stood, holding up the document that should have had my name on it. "Your Honor, this is the fraudulent deed transfer, the one they claim my client agreed to." He slid it onto the judge's desk. "And this," he pulled out a second document. "The original agreement is what she actually signed." The judge picked up both papers, her sharp eyes scanning them. Then, after a long pause, she looked up. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice calm but firm, "did you at any point agree to this transfer?" I straightened my back. "No, Your Honor. I never even saw the final deed until after the house was already in Alex's name." The judge turned to Alex. "Mr. Carter, do you have any proof that your stepsister willingly signed over the property?" Alex hesitated. Too long. Then, finally, he shook his head. "No, Your Honor." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I barely heard the next few minutes' legal terms, official procedures, things Marcus had explained to me but felt distant now, like white noise. All I knew was the expression on my mother's face as she realized it was over, the way Carl slumped back in his chair, the way Alex's smugness finally vanished. Then, the words I had been waiting for: "The court rules in favor of Dr. Carter. The property is to be returned to its rightful owner immediately." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And when I looked over at Alex, at my mother, at the people who had stolen from me, used me, discarded me like I was nothing, I smiled. Because they had just lost everything. I stood in front of my house watching as movers carried out the last of my stepbrother's belongings. The entire place looked different now. It was like the walls had absorbed every bit of tension, every argument, every betrayal, and were finally exhaling, purging themselves of the filth that had tainted them for so long. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the main road. It was peaceful, in a way that it hadn't been in months. Alex wasn't here to see it. Neither was my mother or Carl. They had left in disgrace the moment the judge finalized the ruling. Marcus had insisted I file criminal charges. "They forged your signature, Emma. They stole from you. They deserve to face consequences." But as much as I wanted justice, I knew what would hurt them more than anything: taking away what they thought they had stolen permanently. And that's exactly what I did. The official eviction notice had been sent out the day after the ruling. They had fought it, of course, begged, pleaded, even threatened. But nothing worked. The law was on my side now. The moment the legal documents had been processed, I had taken action. I changed the locks. I canceled the utilities in their name. I made sure they couldn't manipulate their way out of this. And now, watching as the last traces of their presence were hauled away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Rachel pulled up in her car, stepping out with 2 coffee cups in hand. She handed one to me with a smirk. "Figured you could use something stronger, but I'll settle for caffeine." I took it, exhaling sharply before taking a sip. The warmth spread through me, grounding me. "You have no idea." She glanced toward the house. "So, what now? You gonna move in? Make it yours again?" I hesitated. That had been the plan, at least at first. This house had represented so much more than just a home. It had been my dream, my reward for years of sacrifice. But now it just felt like a battlefield. Like the walls still held on to the whispers of betrayal, the echoes of my mother's lies, Alex's entitlement, Carl's indifference. I turned to Rachel. "I'm selling it." Her eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" I nodded, the decision settling in my chest like a weight being lifted. "I don't want this place anymore. Not after everything. I thought I could reclaim it, but it doesn't feel like mine anymore. And I don't want to spend my future living in a past I don't even recognize." Rachel let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's cold." "I love it." I laughed, shaking my head. "I'm not trying to be ruthless." "No," she agreed. "But they deserve it. And honestly, it's a power move. They fought so hard to take this place from you, and now you're walking away from it on your own terms. That's gotta sting." It did. And that was the best part. The listing went up the next morning. Within 3 days, I had offers. Within a week, I had a buyer. And within a month, the house was no longer mine. And just like that, the last thing tying me to them was gone. But of course, they weren't done. I was sitting in my new apartment, one that was mine, and untouched by their to see it when my phone rang. I didn't need to check the caller ID to know who it was. I let it ring. It rang again and again. Finally, after the fifth call, I picked up, putting it on speaker. My mother's voice came through, thick with fake sweetness. "Emma, honey." I leaned back against the couch, swirling the wine in my glass. "Mom." A beat of silence. Then, carefully, she said, "I heard you sold the house." "Wow," I said dryly. "Word travels fast." She exhaled sharply, the facade slipping just a little. "Why would you do that?" I took a sip of wine, savoring the taste before answering. "Because I could." Another pause. Then, a little sharper. "You're being spiteful." That made me laugh. "Spiteful? You mean like forging legal documents and trying to steal my house?" She had the audacity to sigh like she was the victim. "Emma, it wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." "Sweetheart," she tried again, her tone softening. "We're still family." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "No, we're not." She sucked in a breath. "You don't mean that." I did. But instead of saying it outright, I let my silence speak for me. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel guilty about it. Her voice wavered. "Where are we supposed to go?" And there it was, the real reason for the call. Not because she missed me, not because she regretted what she had done, but because she wanted something. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That sounds like a you problem." "Emma, please. You know how hard things have been for us." "Yeah?" I said, standing up, walking toward the window. The city lights stretched out before me, twinkling against the night sky. A new life. A fresh start. "Well, you should have thought about that before you screwed me over." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, quietly, furiously, she hissed, "You're just like your father." My grip on the phone tightened. She had used those words my entire life as an insult. Like being like my father was the worst thing I could be. But now, I smiled. "Thank you," I said simply. And then I hung up. I blocked her number, then Carl's, then Alex's. And for the first time, I was free. No more guilt. No more obligations. No more being the reliable daughter, the one who was always expected to fix things, to sacrifice for people who would never do the same for me. I had chosen myself. And it was the best decision I had ever made. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I would just walk away quietly. But guess what? I took everything back. Not only did I expose their lies, but I made sure they paid for every single thing they did to me. But let me ask you this: if you were in my shoes, would you have stopped where I did? Or would you have made them suffer even more? Comment if you think I got the perfect revenge, or if you think they still got off too easy. And remember, never let anyone, even family, steal what's rightfully yours. If you don't fight for yourself, no one else will. Trust is a privilege, not a guarantee, even with family. I learned the hard way that blind loyalty can cost you everything. In America, we value hard work, independence, and the right to protect what's ours. That means getting everything in writing, securing your finances, and never assuming people, even your own blood, will do right by you. If someone shows you they don't respect your sacrifices, believe them the first time. I walked away, and I don't regret it. Because in the end, choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. And if you don't protect what's yours, no one else will.